today I wanted to talk a little bit more about the role of committees in good decision making. Alice, I'm going to start with you. What is the role of planning committee?
Well, planning committee effectively brings the democratic legitimacy to the planning decisions that were being made. We've got the plan, which is made also through the democratic process, so we've got the decision-making context, but planning is about making decisions in the public interest, and some of those decisions should be made in public for the really significant applications that affect the shape of a place. So the planning committee members bring that scrutiny, that challenge, asking the questions of officers, making sure that the policies are really being correctly applied, representing the views of the public, although it's important to remember that on the planning committee they aren't a ward representative, but they are still democratically elected people. So yeah, it's important that they do bring that challenge, I think, to the decisions that are being made. Also important that they concentrate on the really big schemes, actually, and that their time is freed up to influence the schemes that are shaping the borough. They bring their local interest, they bring their local knowledge, and they bring the feelings of the people with them when they're making these decisions. Okay.
Hannah, I was particularly keen in drawing on your experience on some of the challenges and opportunities of being a planning committee member.
Yes, thank you. I was chair of a planning committee for many years, and so have seen quite a change actually since I first started as chair of the committee, particularly in terms of training. Training when I started wasn't compulsory and now is compulsory. One of the challenges, I think, is ensuring that members understand what their remit is, what their role is, understanding in particular how they apply local policy in their decision making. Some training programs that I've seen don't really go into the detail of what the local plan says, and that's what they should be applying, and that's quite evident in voting and in questions that are asked at committee, was certainly the case. I also think that very important, something that Alice touched on, is ensuring that committees are there and are making the right decisions over the right applications. So the delegated scheme is very important in authorities. So the most important, perhaps controversial applications are going to committee, are in the public eye, and people can see through the transparency that the democratic element does work. I think that's extremely important. Okay.
Sorry, Alice, did you want to add anything?
No,
just agreeing. Jamie, is there room here for more innovative approaches?
I like being controversial, so I'm going to say something slightly controversial. Having listened to the virtues of planning committee there, and I completely agree that there has to be a strong element of democratic legitimacy. It absolutely has to be there. That's fundamental to the planning process. Having said all of that, though, planning committee, as it currently stands, varies from authority to authority. It's conducted in different ways. The level of transparency is different as well. Some authorities allow representations, and there's a dialogue between members and applicants and objectors as well. Others just simply allow the application to proceed, and the officer presents a technical report, questions are asked, and then they make a decision. Varies according to workloads as well. So some authorities have weekly planning committees with large agendas. Others have slightly less frequent committees. So there is a bit of inconsistency around that. And my suggestion, controversial suggestion, is do we really need planning committees? To strip it right back to the very basics. The planning process is a technical process, largely technical process. There's a whole raft of consultation that's required, and that can take some time anyway. Members are involved in the consultation process. They feed into that. They get representations from their constituents. And there is a long lead-in time until you actually get to the planning committee, and then the officer presents their report, and it's debated. Now, the extent of that debate, and Hannah touched on this, maybe it goes back to training, actually. Training is pretty important here. The quality of that debate and the extent of it is actually fundamental to making sure the committee does what it's supposed to be doing. And there are far too many planning committees out there, and I have experience of this, where irrelevant questions are asked and the wrong tests are considered, and fundamentally the wrong decision is made, and then that leaves the local authority open to challenge, and nobody wants to be in that particular position. So why not strip it back for very, very contentious applications? And again, you'd have to find a way of defining that and set some sort of threshold. That for certain applications that warrant that sort of public discourse, then absolutely that sort of environment might be right. But there are far too many applications which do not need to go to planning committee, whether they should be delegated or whether there should be some sort of alternative approach where members still vote, but they don't vote in a big public forum, they vote remotely, or they find a way of reaching a decision based on everything that's been taken into account. it's got to be a different way to do it, I think.
Okay, a different way. We started off there. I thought Jamie was about to undermine the whole democratic element in planning decision making, but really it sounds like what you're saying is about making sure that the right decisions are, the right scale or sort of level of impact of planning application, those discussions are being had at committee, and it goes back to your point around the scheme of delegation and what's being delegated to a committee, and maybe there are other ways beyond a public meeting with long leading times that those sorts of decisions could be taken.
Well, one thing we are going to be looking into for our research is the uniqueness, which is not necessarily a complement of the planning committees, how they vary from borough to borough. Developers often raise this point. They don't quite know what they're going to get when they get to a committee. They don't know the speaking rights are different, as has been highlighted, all the different configurations of how a planning committee operates, which gives a developer uncertainty, but also gives inconsistency in decision making as well. And that is something that we are going to be looking into. We're going to be looking into which planning committees work best and have delivered the best and the most robust decisions. So it'll be an interesting piece of evidence, hopefully, that will come forward from that.
Okay.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because I find quite often advising developers that aren't totally au fait with the planning system, they will always ask, well, when will we get our planning consent? And you can say, well, in theory, you'll get it within 8 weeks or 13 weeks, but there is a long process that leads to that planning committee if it's going to planning committee. And we cannot say, and lawyers love saying this, we like to hedge our bets, but we cannot say for sure that you're going to get this approved, even if the recommendation is approval. And it's very, very hard to get that across to people that aren't aware of the system and understand how it works, that actually it can go into an entirely separate forum with different decision makers and you can come out with an entirely different outcome. And it's that uncertainty which makes it a bit difficult, I think.
Yeah, I agree that there is uncertainty in the system, but I know councils vary, and there are good committees and there are bad committees in terms of their effectiveness and the decisions that they make and the robustness of those decisions. But generally, across the country, I think of cases that go to committee, probably you get 1 in 10 or so decisions overturned. And I know for that individual concerned, it's really annoying and it's thrown things into doubt. But actually, that's the price of democracy. And I would be as worried about a council that never overturned any officers' decisions as I am about a council that overturns a lot. You know, there has to be that challenge, and that's quite right. And sometimes the committee members will come to a different decision. Sometimes as an officer, I know I'm going to a committee with where the planning issues are really finely balanced, and I could have constructed an argument either way, but I chose to go with a recommendation for approval because that's what planners tend to do. But I'm perfectly aware that somebody might put a different weight on the balance of judgments and come to a different conclusion, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's the concept of planning judgment, and you're absolutely right. You sort of steered us in that direction there at the end, that maybe those are the sorts of things that should be going to committee, finely balanced decisions where you need a different level of oversight.
Okay, all about balance. Thank you very much.